Good morning. Today we look at Mark chapter 7, verses 1 through 13. Not very many verses. When I looked at that, I thought, wow, that's not very long. But that's, when we read the New Testament in a year's time, we don't have to cover nearly as much as we did when we were looking at the Old Testament. But in today's reading, Jesus is tested by some Pharisees and scribes that have come from Jerusalem. And, Jesus, the home community right now is at Capernaum, and, up here in Jerusalem is, a ways away. So they're coming to check him out. He is causing such a stir among the people. And the religious leaders are very concerned about, if he's leading them astray or if he's legitimate. They ask him many times, who are you? Where do you get this power? And so many different things. But they come and they're watching. It says they had gathered around him. And so they were a part of the crowd that was around Jesus and seeing what's going on. And they challenge him with, why do your disciples not wash their hands when they eat? And then it tells us their tradition was, that they and all Jews would wash their hands. And we do that, right? We usually wash our hands before a meal, or, you gather with kids and especially grandkids. Have you washed your hands yet? And then you look and, well, evidently, no, they haven't. But, whether you wash your hands or not, isn't the end of all things, but it's just a good hygiene practice. Wash your hands. And it says that they also did not eat anything from the marketplace unless they washed it. And I can understand that too. When we buy fruit and when we buy, some vegetables and stuff, carrots and potatoes and, things that have grown in the ground, we wash them. We don't want to have a bunch of dirt on them. It's just common sense to do some of that. But the disciples weren't following the tradition. And I always think about tradition and of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, just struggling with tradition, with his daughters. And tradition, is one of those things that we can get caught up in. We do it because our mom and dad did it that way. Grandpa and grandma did it that way. And, it's passed down from one to another. And it's just a story of, why this, woman always trimmed something off, before she cooked it. And, well, her husband asked why. And she said, well, I don't know. That's the way Mom always did it. So they go ask Mom. And, well, I don't know. That's the way Grandma always did it. And they go ask Grandma. Well, because that way it would fit in the pan I had, And so sometimes the traditions, we don't know why they've come about. And sometimes like the Hatfields and McCoys, they could no longer remember what brought about this disagreement. But tradition, it is important. And as Jesus teaches us the Lord's Prayer. He teaches us to baptize. He teaches us to have Holy Communion. And these traditions are a part of our church culture, a part of who we are as Christians that way. These traditions, but yet they're more than just traditions. And so the Pharisees were quite upset because the disciples were outside of tradition. They weren't, they were going to maybe lead people astray from what they should be doing. And Jesus just responds, he says, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you people. These people, and then he says, he quotes as, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. Teaching human precepts as doctrines. The traditions have gotten to be more important than the Word of God, is what Jesus is telling them. And sometimes today, in today's society, I've heard people say that, we know more than God. So some of what God said is old-fashioned, it's outdated. We don't have to do that anymore. But I have yet to really see, have anybody, convince me of something that God said, as being, not valid today. And then, excuse me, he says to them, you abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. So then he talks about the commandment, honor your father and your mother. And he says, you have changed it to say that whatever support you might have had from me, the child supporting the mother or father, is korban. That should be an offering to God. So rather than take care of you, I'm going to give that little bit to God. I'm not going to worry about you, mom or dad, whatever. And not that there's anything wrong with giving to God either, but it's just, you got to take care of the things that need to be taken care of, and parents are one of them. And Jesus says, you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition. You have said now that it is no longer valid to take care of your mother or father. And in today's society, we don't see so often that, the parents and the grandparents are brought into the home. And they, I remember back in the 1960s when the first nursing homes were being built here in rural North Dakota, and my grandparents on my dad's side went from living in their house where they could no longer take care of themselves to being in this nursing home. I mean, we were pretty packed with 9 of us in our little house that we had, but it's, it used to be that, the families would take care of them, to honor that the grandparents and stuff that way. But Jesus has said, you're not even doing that. And I'm not saying that with our parents in nursing homes or care facilities that way, there's probably a better thing to call them. But a facility where they have people help take care of them, especially the assisted living places, facilities that we have now, or, it's to honor their integrity and keep them within their, as much freedom as they have, and to have a home where they can be. But, Jesus is saying to these Pharisees and scribes that, you're putting more emphasis on your tradition than you are on honoring your parents and also on honoring God. Because that's the way it was. So many of the things that they did, they were being kind of two-faced. They were talking out of both sides of their mouth, as one of the expressions that we have. And he says, you're making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on, and you do many other things like this. So this wasn't the only thing that Jesus called them out on. He says, you do many other things as well. And that's, the scribes and Pharisees, as we read through the New Testament, especially the Gospels, where they're dealing with Jesus, and then what we find it, with Jesus' followers as well, after Jesus' resurrection, that, they can't grasp this truth speaking that Jesus has. And we find that in today's society as well, that they just, people get a mindset, and we can't argue them into believing what we believe. What we have to do is to show them by how we live, and to, be an example for them of God's love and of God's grace, and just to live our lives that are a reflection of what it is that we believe. But the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders had gotten so many things that are getting in the way of the word and the truth, that they couldn't truthfully and rightfully lead the people, because Jesus said, so much of what you're doing is not according to the word of God. And I know that there are a lot of different ways to interpret the word of God. A lot of people interpret certain verses differently that way. But it's, last Sunday I said we need to use the word of God to interpret the word of God. So to understand something that is, in the New Testament, we can use lessons from the Old Testament or other lessons in the New Testament. But it's It's not to just say that, well, this is what I think, and there is no other way to think about it, because there are different ways to think about it. And so for the scribes and Pharisees to look at Jesus' disciples not washing their hands, to them, that was a grievous evil. It was just something that just should not be. But yet, it wasn't one of the things that Jesus made high importance. So it's, to think about who we are, what we do, and how others see us, and see how others look at us as Christians. And I mean, and sometimes in today's society, Christians get a bad rap as well, and I understand that, but it's not what it should be. So we need to look more at the Word of God than at some of the traditions that we maybe blindly follow.